Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar. Today's topic is This Ain't Your Father's Service Desk. Now before we begin, I would like to introduce you to Mike Michalczyk. Mike is the Senior Director of Product Management for ITinvolve. He is responsible for competitive and comparative analysis of the ITSM market and new product strategy and development. He works with customers to help identify, design, and develop new products and strategies that deliver more effective solutions to the challenges faced by IT professionals every day in their complex and evolving environments. Prior to joining ITinvolve, Mike served as a Senior Product Line Manager, NetIQ, as well as a Systems Integrator for Sprint. With more than 20 years of experience in information technology and information security, he holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Central Missouri State University in Integrated Communications. Mike was named to the International Who's Who of Entrepreneurs in 1997 and the International Who's Who of Information Technology in 1999. And I'd also like to introduce you today to George Spalding. George is the co-author of ITinvolve V3's Continual Service Improvement Core Volume. George was recently awarded the 2012 Ron Munn's Lifetime Achievement Award from HDI and is one of the world's most insightful and engaging IT service management and support experts. In addition to his extensive commitment to improving the industry, George has spent several years as a consultant to the White House on technical presentations and White House conferences. He also coordinated technical presentations for members of the President's Cabinet, the Smithsonian Institute, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. George is an ITIL expert level in the ITIL certification program. He is a regular author of IT articles and white papers and is a presenter at global ITSM conferences and events. So George, if you like, could you take it away?
Thanks, Lisa. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are when you're listening to all this. So the title I've got up here is This Ain't Your Father's Help Desk, and that's because when your father was playing around or in IT, if your father ever played around in IT or with a computer, it wasn't a service desk, it was a help desk. In fact, the first volume from ITIL, which actually came out in 1989, was called Help Desk. It wasn't until the second version of ITIL that we changed the name to Service Desk, but we'll get to that in a minute. All right, so let's get moving. So why do we have a help desk or a service desk to begin with? Because in the beginning, way back when, 1,000 years ago, there was no help desk. How long ago was that, really? Really, it was about 25 years ago, there really were absolutely no help desks. It tended to start in two areas. It started in the world of telecom, which was part of the issue because the big telephone companies were actually the big companies of the day. You remember AT&T before the breakup and the Bell system and all that stuff. They were huge companies, and they actually needed a help desk because people were calling in for sales help, if you will. But in the world of computers and IT that we know, it was actually a bit different than that. It was early computers especially, were confusing. So people needed help. So people would call what we now call the IT department. In those days, it was data processing. And they would call data processing, and they would talk to technical people who were obviously chosen for their interpersonal skills. Not. So they would talk to these technical people who were quite rude and arrogant and didn't really care whether or not these people got it up and running, and they would help as much as possible, and the help desk was born. It became obvious we needed a group of people who were focused and specialized on this concept of helping other people, who had interpersonal skills, who could talk to other people, who could, in essence, warm up to them, if you will. So that became a big deal. And we started actually training people. I was one of those early people back in the early 90s who was actually training people on how to set up a help desk and what was the important factors around help desk and what were the right decisions to make and why was it actually cheaper to have a help desk than not, because there were some studies that came out that said that people were costing 7 or 8 times the cost of a help desk by doing self-support, self-service, not the self-service we know today where they'd go to a website. There were no websites. They would basically just fix it themselves, or people within accounting would be helping other people in accounting, and that got pretty bad and pretty expensive. So anyway, the world of help desk was born, and I don't think I need to explain what a help desk is, but I will. It's in our world, as we've progressed through time into the intergenerational stuff that we now have, a help desk really was reactive. People sat there, in essence, waiting for the phone to ring, and it rang. It rang a lot because things were confusing, and because who knew what was going on. So the phone rang, which is really funny because my phone is ringing in here, but I hope someone answers it. And so the phone would ring, they would pick it up, they would find out what was going on, and they would start helping them. There were no systems. It became obvious pretty quick that we needed some kind of system, some kind of database of the people, whatever it was, plus a database of the issues, and then we started getting into the concept of knowledge and maybe actually trying to fix things almost proactively. This was a pretty advanced concept of the day, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And nowadays, of course, people call in. We have a system. We know who they are. They tell us who they are. They give us a number, whatever. We call them up. We can see it. And then we, from that point on, we hopefully that we connect them with an incident. The incident already is in the database, we hope. And if not, then we have to figure it out, and that takes a little longer and a lot more work, et cetera, et cetera. So that's pretty normal stuff in the world that we have today, and that's a normal thing in the world of ITIL. So the mission, though, what I can find as the mission is that in the early days, the mission was fix the technology. In other words, it was obvious that the technology seemed to have some issues, but what we learned often was that it was really a training issue. It was really something besides the technology. Technology was actually working. The customer didn't understand it. The customer had never been trained. All of those types of things came into play. And it was pretty obvious it needed to become more customer-focused. And when we got to the world of ITIL, it did. In those days, we were actually, I confess that 20 years ago, I taught classes called How to Provide Effective User Support. And in those classes, I was saying the words like, well, surely they'll use the manual. And, of course, they didn't use the manual. Well, we're looking forward to more help systems that will work better, that will be contextual as to where people are. This was 1992, 93. And, of course, we kind of got those. Microsoft pumped in with, at least as Windows 95 and all that stuff. F1 and all that was contextual help, but it really didn't help. People didn't hit it. They didn't look at it. They wanted it to just work. They wanted everything to be perfect. There was no web to go out to look for things. There was no Google. We call that time frame BG, like AD, BG, before Google. So that was a before Google time frame. And pretty much everybody who's listening to this has at some time or other, and I do it all the time, gone to Google and typed, how do I fill in the blank? And, anything from how do I, my printer is doing this weird thing, or I'm getting this error message, or in my case, how do I wire a 3-pole light switch? And, it just, anything like that. And poof, the answers pop up on Google. So times are changing along those words. The computer technology itself was, and in some cases still is, the problem. But it's also the solution, because we've now gotten to the point where the technology is sophisticated enough that we can actually use the technology to solve some of the issues. And some of this stuff is exciting, and I'm sure you'll hear more from Michael later on. But what became obvious was that the thing the service desk really needed to do, what it really needed to do was to be a single point of contact and a single point of communication. And that single point of communication is where ITIL started to focus in. Because what we really needed to do was to channel the places where the customer could interface directly with IT, as opposed to just any place, any time, stop anybody in the hallway and start a project, or what we call drive-bys, where they basically get someone as they walk by to solve their issue, and while they're there at their desk, they always say, "Oh, thank you so much, that was great. Oh, by the way, I have a few other things." So that kind of concept created, first of all, the people out there said, well, I have other things to do. I have other priorities. Bad line, but true. But so it also created kind of bad feelings, like I had you right here and you wouldn't help me. Or if I had you here and you did help me, someone else went wanting. So it was not well organized. It wasn't a good way to do it. But what became obvious is that auto mechanics were better than the help desk at communications. In other words, you take your car in, you drop it off, you don't know what's wrong with it, and you expect a call at some point, maybe 2-3 hours later, telling you what is wrong with it and telling you probably how much it's going to cost, but still an estimate because they haven't gotten into it completely. So a few hours later, if it's going to be done that day, you call them, they call you and give you the final details, and the details of basically you drop your car off at a place where you wouldn't normally go, to men with dirty hands and greasy arms, and they call later with the details of the ransom. You go to conclude the exchange, give them your credit card, and you get your car back. The truth is that the feeling among people, still today really, is they didn't want their car fixed. They wanted it back. It was too much a part of their life. So the communication about when it's going to be ready and what it's going to cost, that's the important thing. What was wrong? That was really unimportant to most people. It was just, I need it back, I need it back, I need it back. My life isn't right without my car. I got to have my car. Same thing with computers today, same thing with cell phones, same thing with mobile phones. All that stuff is the same. So it's just changed and moved. But the real help desk and service desk world needs to be about communication. So in the world of early ITIL, the ITIL, as I said before, was the first help desk. First book was Help Desk, and it really started focusing on the single point of contact. That's what it went. And it started to say that the service desk was indeed the place where you would call, you would email, you would chat, whatever form was available at the time, you would do, and you would go to that one place. And that one place was where the specialists existed, was where people who knew how to help you existed, was where the database of issues and problems and incidents existed. That was the place to go. It was the most important spot. It was also the place, as over time, where we started off on small changes got involved at the service desk, where requests went in to the service desk. It became a very centralized point of contact for the customer base. And that's good, and that makes total sense. And that's still today the way it should be, I believe. And change management actually starts to get into it a little bit. Where does a change begin its life? How do I go in and start a change on its journey? That type of thing. Service desk in some organizations became the obvious place. Okay, let's keep going. So today, 2012, where are we? Well, times have changed. So here's a quote from from the CTO, Chief Technical Officer of NASA, that says, help desks will be a thing of the past. He basically says it's impossible. You can either blow the service desk up, meaning, forget it, or forbid any new devices and end users will be unhappy. Well, that takes us to the next step, which is, I don't know what business you're all in, but there are some businesses that go through a change freeze around Christmas time. Banks, credit card processing, and retail organizations, large retail companies, freeze changes from the middle of November until the first week in January. And they do this because, quite frankly, they can't afford the risk of a change causing an outage during the Christmas buying season. You don't mess with Christmas. 50 to 60% of their revenue happens in those 6 weeks. So therefore, there is no way that they're going to take a risk. And this also then means that we understand that change and changes in the infrastructure are pretty much the cause of 70, 80, 90% of the incidents that we face. So changes cause incidents. No changes, no incidents. That's really what he's saying. Either blow the service desk up or don't change anything. So, and when you do go through these change freezes at these big organizations, the number of incidents doesn't just go down. It drops off a cliff. It goes from like 1,000 to 0. I mean, not quite, but close. It's amazing how it just all stops and then starts back up when the changes are unfrozen. So what he's really saying is that the help desk of the past and its role of the past is being supplanted in some cases by social media. And I've seen one organization where they have an internal collaboration platform called Yammer. And that internal collaboration platform, the help desk manager started watching the stream on Yammer, realizing that incidents were being presented in Yammer that were they never called the help desk about these incidents. They never went into the help desk database. None of that existed. No, they were just on the database. Or excuse me, they were on the Yammer stream, not on the database. And then they were being fixed by other people on the Yammer stream, experts or employees of the company, who were then offering expertise on this subject. So he realized that a whole new thing was going on outside of the normal incident management process that ITIL was promoting and that we consider mature help desk, service desk world. So he realized that that was going on. Of course, it goes on beyond that. Google, but that was inside the company because it was an internal enterprise collaboration platform. So at least we weren't publicly going out and saying, you know, my company, XYZ, doesn't know how to do this. Can you help us? You know, we weren't doing that on Google. But it was internal to the company, so it was still reasonably okay. But what he was saying, what he was understanding was, and what he did was, he started watching the stream for Yammer, identifying incidents, picking them out, putting them in the regular help desk process, having a regular analyst work on them, enter the fix, and send them back. Because what was going on was experts out in the field, non-IT people, were helping people on Yammer. Those fixes were never getting put in the knowledge base. The incidents were never being recorded. There was no data, which is what we really consider important. It became obvious over the last 20 years to me that the service desk is indeed the beginning source of all the raw data of what goes on in IT, of what's working right and what's working wrong, of what was poorly designed and poorly executed, and well designed and well executed. It's all right there in the incident database. We know exactly what's happening, and we know what should be happening and what shouldn't be happening. It's all about data, which then put into context becomes knowledge. And knowledge becomes really the important byproduct, if you will, of the service desk. In this new world of social media, we may indeed have the ability to get instantaneous fixes from anonymous sources, if you will, but the truth is we don't really accumulate the knowledge, and we don't make that, we don't improve. We fix things at the spur of the moment, but we really don't improve per se. We just fix things whenever we want and by whoever we believe, anyone who responds, whether they are, whether they have our best interests at heart or not. So is he right? Is this guy right? Well, in some ways he's right, because I believe the service desk of the future needs to be more proactive and more innovation focused. So let's get on to that. So here's an article from Forbes.com which says, build a genius bar, not a help desk. And what they're really saying there is, once again, let's get a bunch of specialists who are truly focused on productivity and innovation, helping users go further than where they are now, helping them with what they don't understand, and then taking them to the next step of, now that you understand that, look what you could do. Now that you understand that, you could download this app from the App Store, and you could do this. And that's an approved app in our organization. Ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. So in other words, helping them innovate, helping them become more productive, more than just keeping the infrastructure up. It's more than just, keeping the lights on. It's making the individuals more productive and more innovative. Okay, So what's next? Well, we're already in the middle of bring your own device, support your own device. No question about that. Is that going to go away? No. Is it going to be the way it is? Yes. Is it inevitable? Yes. So there are still organizations that are out there, plenty of them, who are blocking devices from getting onto the corporate network. So this is spawning a generation of people who have two smartphones. Often one BlackBerry, one iPhone. The BlackBerry is always the corporate device because it's more secure as far as the corporation is concerned. And the iPhone is the personal device because it's more fun. Now, that's not always the way it works, but it's still there a lot. There's a lot of people doing that. I believe that in the next 2 to 3 years, this will all be dealt with. This is an interim problem. We will be walking around with one device and one device only. It will be whatever it is. I don't know what it is. It'll be one of the big four. It'll be an Android device or a BlackBerry or an iPhone or a Windows phone. So one of those four devices it's going to be, you're only going to have one device. You're going to do your business on it. You're going to do your personal stuff on it. It's all going to be one deal. Support your own device. Right now, it's kind of interesting. We're outsourcing, if you will, stealth outsourcing, the support of these devices, these mobile devices, to either the AT&T store or Verizon or to the Apple store because we're basically saying, well, we don't support those devices, so when people bring them, they go somewhere else for support. And in some ways, it saves a lot of money. Saves money on support, saves money on buying the device. There's a lot of good news about it, but there's also a lot of security issues, and we're still working through that. I'm not going to get into that. We can do that whole thing. We can do that another time, okay, Mike? I believe the workforce is more mobile now. People are picking up their email 7 days a week, and often throughout the evening. They don't have to sit down at their laptop or their home computer. They can do it right on their phone, on their smartphone. They're working on emails and things of that nature. So we got mobile workforce almost 24/7. So we're going to need mobile support. We have to support the devices without question that they use for corporate work. Now the question is, should the service desk itself be mobile? I believe that we always had, a kind of a stationary place, and then we would send out people to do desk side support if necessary. A lot of remote control stuff, solved our problem with that. So the question is, should it be mobile? Well, I recently read an article from the folks at Gartner that said, no, bad idea. Should not have your service desk be mobile. That's a terrible idea. And I think they're wrong. I think the service desk should indeed be mobile. Obviously, there's a central database of people and incidents, and there's also solutions and knowledge, but all that's accessible through a mobile device. Worst case, it's an iPad, let alone an iPhone. I mean, you can walk around with an iPad, as they're starting to do in hospitals. If it's good enough for them to save my life with it, I think it's good enough to provide corporate support. Plus, I now get a lot of the intangibles taken care of. I get interpersonal relationships between IT and the customer. I'm right there. Here I am. I'm in your face. It's me, tech guy. And then I also solve that. I can solve other issues. I can enter tickets right there when I'm with them. So the drive-bys and stealth support, all that stuff just goes away. It just disappears. So social media integration, there's no question that the social media world, whether it's enterprise collaboration or whether it's Twitter or Facebook or anything else, is part of our future in the world of support, and we need to integrate with that. And we need to work with the tools and tool vendors to make that happen. Much less break-fix do I see in the future because I don't see things breaking as much. And still, for the most part, most of the things that break, according to our friends at Gartner, 80% of the things that break were caused by people, not by technology. Much more dependency on knowledge. The question is whether the knowledge is organized, whether it's indexed, whether it's searchable, and whether I can find it quickly. And I mean quickly. I mean 10 seconds, 20 seconds. All right, you're already pushing my patience limit. Okay, fine. I'll look at the very first page of the Google search, but that's it. I'm not going to the second page. Even though there were 2 million hits, I'm still only going to look at 5. So much more self-service. I think that the workforce is younger, as the people that are my age are starting to retire. We're talking about 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every day in the current workforce. So as my group retires, the workforce becomes younger, much more used to technology, much more comfortable with technology, and therefore those are the people who are going to be much more comfortable with self-service. There's going to be new forms of self-service. It's going to be the stuff we provide. It's going to be wikis. It's going to be instant messaging, collaboration platforms. The other thing is knowledge articles in text aren't going to work anymore. It's all going to be video. That's what they're going to be looking for. They're going to be looking for video tutorials on the topic that they're seeking. Now, they don't have to be fancy. They don't have to be spiff. They can be shot with a smartphone. They don't have to be fancy or produced well or edited brilliantly. None of that stuff. But they probably need to be video and not text. That's going to make the biggest difference for people. More productivity, more innovation focus, and more creativity needed at the service desk area to keep the world up and to keep them focused on productivity and more innovation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Michael. And let me move on. And I'm going to pass Michael the ball. And Michael's going to take it from there.
Well, thank you, George. And you've done a wonderful job of helping set the context for my part of the presentation. I thank you for that, which is for showing us how we got there and how we got from point A to point B. And now, where do we need to go in order to support? If George's predictions are correct and where he sees things going do pan out, then it's how do we help, how do we get there as IT professionals? How do we enable ourselves to take this step? So much of what we'll be talking about in the next few minutes will focus on how existing tools IT relies on must evolve in order to support the transition that George has explained. So with that, what I'd like to do here is take the next couple of minutes and go through the current state of ITSM tools as told through the perspective of both Gartner and Forrester. Next, we'll look at how the landscape of our IT environments are today, whether you consider your organization relatively simple or extraordinarily complex. Then what we'll do is we'll take a look at what we need to address today's challenges and lay that groundwork for the future that will help enable our IT organizations to transition more seamlessly into what George also discussed. And finally, we'll end with a little bit with George and I doing a brief Q&A on based on the questions that we've gotten so far during the call or during the webinar. So, interesting enough, in 2010, Gartner chose to stop producing its normal Magic Quadrant on service desk solutions, basically saying, you know what, there's lack of innovation and everything's pretty well become commoditized. Well, then in 2012, Gartner released a new Magic Quadrant. Around this time, though, they put it around IT service support management tools. And in this report, they had some notable conclusions. And they said, you know what, first, service desk tools in their current form are not sufficient for maintaining the productivity, and George also alluded to some of how productivity will change and need to change both now and in the future. And there were no leaders or visionaries from among the current selection of vendors. And Gartner went on to state that organizations needed solutions that would facilitate the end-to-end visualization of relationships, and that IT organizations needed to improve their social IT management capabilities to improve collaboration and share best practices and make that transition that George had just spoken about. Also at the same time, actually it was a little bit earlier than that, in December 2011, Forrester published a piece on CMDBs and concluded that the CMDB in its current form had not had the overall success originally envisioned. If you remember where George spoke about a moment ago, he said that, you know, look at where we started. We started at a help desk. These other things came into being over time. And while Forrester in the articles had said, you know what, CMDBs have failed, I tend to think of it a little bit differently. I tend to think that maybe we realized what we needed, but we didn't necessarily know how to go about effectively integrating it into our environment. So I kind of like a quote Thomas Edison said, which was, I've not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that it won't work. Well, you know what? We've tried, and we've found a few ways that have not returned the results we were hoping for, and Now I think we see the ability for where we need to go and what needs to transpire for us to take these next steps. They further stated that infrastructure and operations teams needed trustworthy information now more than ever. And this goes back to what George said around knowledge and how knowledge dependencies will continue to increase. And finally, Forrester's Greg O'Donnell said, you know what, we need to go beyond the sources that we've normally looked at. And he gave this expansion the working name of a service information system. So even moving beyond just a service desk, but now it becomes more informative and more knowledge predicated. Again, supporting this idea of moving from a commodity of, hello, how are you today, to the expert providing the help. So in the end, the service desk in its current form had been effective for a documentation source of record. Current solutions have gotten many IT organizations down the road, and it's only been with the advent of social networking that we can really start to see where current system limitations are. Our scope and premise are insufficient to what, and we realize that the breadth of information that we use have changed. And you know what? We have to look at this as in a fresh new way and have a fresh new approach to it. So let's take just a second. Let's talk about some of these complexities. First, we have ever-increasing complexity and constant change in our environment. You start adding things like virtualization, the cloud, the need to support mobile devices. It only adds to the complexity that IT personnel have to get their arms around and manage. With this increased complexity, it's come further scattered. We've scattered our data even further. In many organizations, there is absolutely no single trustworthy go-to source of information that depicts the IT environment. And you know, while we've embraced communication like we've never had before, the irony is our visibility has become more limited. As teams are increasingly having difficulty seeing the impacts of implemented or proposed changes, and sometimes the actions we take to resolve an incident have very unintended repercussions. Having shared visibility across upstream, downstream relationships, across security and compliance boundaries, across silos, are all things we talk about and say we want, yet few of us have successfully been able to do, in large part because of our fragmentation of data. Finally, all of these challenges are complicated by the increase in regulatory requirements over the past several years. At the same time, we've increased pressure from what our end users expect, going back to what George was talking about. Yeah, you know what? Now there is an expectation that it's all just going to work, and it has to be there. It will be mobile. The idea that the messaging system will be down for a period of time is a thing of the past. People have withdrawal syndromes if they can't get to their data when they feel they need it. These challenges are all we're all sitting there going, yeah, well, duh, your stranglehold on the obvious is frightening. And it's amazing that so few of these are new challenges. They've been around for a very long time. The problem in part has rested in the fact that many of the existing solutions just don't sufficiently help solve them. And you know what? I'm a vendor. I will admit it. I will concede the point. We understand these challenges, and we think that we've actually helped deal with some of them, and that we have something that's a potential breakthrough that we think can deal with these issues for good. And in the next few minutes, you'll hear us talk about the challenges we see and what we think is needed, and encourage you that if you agree with us to come and take a look and learn more about us. So what do we think is needed? All right, first, we have to come to grips with the idea that the solution must recognize the federation of knowledge in our environments. Knowledge sources are both human and technological, and they must be seamlessly integrated and encapsulated in a familiar social framework that promotes the transparency and successfully operates within our paradigms of just-in-time delivery. We need to next. After that, we have to be able to facilitate communication between peoples, teams, groups that foster effective collaboration and common context. The solution must understand that the users require ability to see the same problem from different vantage points in order to truly provide a value add to the process. And it has to provide a mechanism to easily extract knowledge from collaboration and make it and hold on to it. It's something George mentioned earlier, that we lose the data as we go because we don't have this ability to capture and in the streams of our collaboration, the Yammer example. 3, the solution cannot just simply be a collector of knowledge or a channel to knowledge. The solution must understand the context that the user is working in and then provide the knowledge options that are relevant to the task at hand, whether the knowledge is a technical key setting or a policy that dictates how the product is or how the application is managed or secured. 4th, you have to be able to do impact analysis. You have to be able to leverage the collective knowledge and of relationships, dependencies, and the like, and provide easy-to-use visualization of the potential impacts, as well as identify the stakeholders and business owners that will be impacted. And lastly, we have to have a solution that optimizes our processes, or that helps us to optimize them. We cannot rely on processes that we have put in place because they act as a backstop because we either don't know the information or we're scared that the information we have is inaccurate and not held up to date. And so if we start digging into this a little bit, we need to get a little bit of a better idea of what's going on here. We all understand quite well where knowledge comes from. We are aware that the list of sources of information, wiki, SharePoint, knowledge management systems, spreadsheets, people's heads, in some cases people have CMDBs or CMS systems, and we've got auto discovery in there, and you get the idea. Our organizations today, you're using at least one of these, probably more than one of these, and you're understanding the idea that the current approach, as we've tried to do this, is address the knowledge gap. Our organizations have been surprised by the reluctance of IT groups to embrace this, share the knowledge, and understand it. And while sometimes there may be a lack of willingness to collaborate between groups, in truth, from talking with hundreds of IT professionals, attending conferences, and then even thinking of my own experience back when I was in data center operations, I have found a very different recurring theme. First, the current approach of the existing solutions, it's difficult to use and consistently retrieve meaningful results. And the other problem is it requires us, the person, to associate and do all those contexts of information ourselves. It says we have to go out, and we may get a place to start, but now we have to do all the cross connects. What we need instead is a system that comes between these federated sources of knowledge that respects and honors the constructs of these knowledge sources and places them so now instead of there being me going out searching everywhere, it's I at least now have a conduit into this as well. All right, so there are numerous examples where information can significantly benefit others. And we've got, the result is where decisions are being made. I'll give you a perfect example of one. You know, here's a great example. And that is where network teams oftentimes create network diagrams. And other operations teams run right out and see how fast they can find those diagrams because they help them, and they're treated like gold in other parts of the organization. The problem is the network team did not necessarily develop those documents for the purpose of public consumption. So they go and update them. They don't go out and tell everyone. So you've got these teams who have found them and are using them, but what they don't realize is that now they're dealing with stale data. So you have, this goes back to what George was speaking about a moment ago, which is this case of where knowledge is not shared well, and now we end up in a case of where one group is making a decision resulting on bad data, results in a change, and as the guy from NASA said, you can kill the changes, you'll kill the incidents. And this is part of the reason why. Next, here, think of it, here's another quick way of thinking about this. Let's think about it like Wikipedia. Articles begin as a personal reflection or essay. Somebody starts and writes an article on something. As soon as they do, other subject matter experts will contribute to the quality of the subject material, and then they will also other experts will contribute to the presentation of the knowledge. This common sourcing, if you will, or community sourcing, if you will, helps deal with one of the biggest problems we have with the trustworthiness of our data. and that is that at the time of insertion, it's dealt with. We understand it's verified. The veracity, the authenticity of it is dealt with, and so we're not waiting to a point of critical need to make that assertion of is it useful or is it not. So moving on, let's talk about how now understanding communication and collaboration and what that is. First, let me clear up one of the most common myths that I've heard out there, and that is that communication is not collaboration. Collaboration comes from communication. Collaboration is when two or more people are working on a common problem. But collaboration has the common problem or context that frames their communications. For us, we have those such as incidents or problems, we have proposed changes, we have applications and services. To say it as simply and plainly as possible, the next generation of our solutions that we look at must facilitate that real-time collaboration. It has to help frame our communications in the right context to reduce the noise. Sometimes what we see are solutions who attempt to tack on social into our current service desk solutions, and so now we're getting all the noise, and it's up to us to filter out what is relevant and applicable to what we're working on at that time. If we look briefly at what happens today, what we see is our tools that help frame context like our service desk get separated from our communication tools like email and instant messaging. And our result in having to attempt to transfer that context and hope our recipients understand often results in some of the issues that you're probably most familiar with, lost knowledge. This would be the tribal knowledge that people know but isn't documented anywhere, but we know it exists. Misaligned context, when one or more person groups think that they're working on the same thing, but they're working at it from two separate points of view, and the lack of context actually elongates the time it takes to resolve the problem. And finally, we're in the rediscovery of knowledge. It's where knowledge can exist or information exists, if we use the information hierarchy correctly. Information exists that can be used in multiple different ways, but it can't be used but every time we change context, we have to rediscover the same information. So let's talk about this. Many of us have tried to talk about, let's talk about the automatic identification and presentation of knowledge. Again, this reinforces some of the points George made earlier. I was meeting with a couple of people once here recently, and two of these professionals told me basically two different stories but similar ideas. First, that 60% of their service desk technicians' time was spent trying to track down people that were going to be impacted by an incident or plan change, people who had knowledge that could help solve it, or trying to identify where needed information even resided. Then in a totally separate conversation, another professional brought up that their organization had attempted to solve problems by implementing a knowledge management system. Instead, the solution was difficult to search and get information. People knew that the information in it was not trustworthy because they knew the groups that were supposedly the architects or the creators of the knowledge didn't rely on the knowledge management system, and therefore they had to try to search, get through the data, and figure out the results themselves as to whether they were meaningful or not. What you need is a solution that relies on the dependencies and the relationships being defined by the people who know, and then take that information and put it into a system so that when we're trying to work through a problem, only the relevant pieces come through. And when you have that automatic identification and presentation of knowledge combined with correct collaboration and in-context collaboration, your result is a quicker access to information you need that then you can share with others or you can use to resolve whatever issue you're facing. Let me give you an example of something like this. Let me make it a very practical example. And I'll use my own past in this. And while on the screen I have MTTR broken down, it is not my intention to give you an academic lesson in metrics that we all use every day in our everyday life. Here's what I do want to break into, though, is you'll notice that there is that TT time and IT time, the triage time and implementation time. We cannot get away from those two variables. The time it takes us to triage an issue and the time it takes for us to develop a reaction plan or a response plan and implement that response, whatever that response may be. So I was called to work in one day on an incident that had occurred. It was a high priority SEV2. Walk into the floor and I'm told, start uninstalling this network client because you know what? It's the only change we can think of that can possibly account for why most of the people on this floor are having lousy connectivity issues. So myself and a team of others began uninstalling this application client because, of course, the software rollback system didn't roll it back correctly. At the same time, on the other side, we had our network technicians who had their network monitoring tool that started firing and going off, saying that their switches or that their routers were having to deal with a very high number of packets that they were having to discard that were well above the threshold. And so now they start working from this problem, the exact same floor. We know there was communication because at least one time one of the guys came walking by me. We talked for 4 or 5 minutes about what was going on, what he was doing, what we were doing, and he talked with a number of others on the floor, so we know there was communication, but there was not collaboration. In the end, some 14 hours later, what we discovered was after uninstalling all those clients, it didn't change the problem. And when we started putting the people together to really collaborate on the issue, it turned out that it was a bad transceiver on a router interface that was starting to go bad and going bad intermittently. The result, because we spent all this time misdiagnosing, not collaborating together and working together in this, what ended up happening is we shot our metrics that month, and I'm sure you all know what it is to have to sit and listen to people tell you why you didn't hit your MTTR number. And while this wasn't the only issue that contributed to that, it certainly was a contributor. The bottom line to this is that it is when we can take that knowledge, automatically present it, put it in the right context and frame the collaboration, that we reduce that time to triage and that time to implementation. You know what? Everybody says, oh, well, I hear people talk differently about impact analysis. Let me put it this way. It is alive and well in every IT organization, and the minute you have your change owners writing change recs and submitting them for approval prior to implementing them, you are doing a form of impact analysis. The problem is, how accurate is it? That gets us into one of our first areas. And so then we have our change advisory boards and other bodies behind it that what we do is we either accept the change owner's recommendation essentially, or what their assessment is, or we override it when we discover new information. Depending on your level of your organization's level of success with implementing existing CMDBs or CMS solutions, some of you will say, you know what, we've got this down. We can do this. But here's the thing that you need to tie back to. Your ability to do effective impact analysis is directly tied back to how trustworthy the information is that you're building in on top of it. If you're following the normal paradigms of what we deal with today, then there is that big question of trustworthiness. When you add the social paradigms into it to where that information is verified at point of entry or point of association, not at point of critical need, then you start having from collaboration consensus, and from consensus trustworthiness or truth that you can rely upon. So we can see how an organization that has a CMS system in it but doesn't trust the data can also have every bit the same trouble with impact analysis as an organization that doesn't. Also, impact analysis depends on risk assessment. And having an understanding of risk is one of those things that is a very subjective thing, and in many organizations, the organization responsible for the risk assessment is not the person that is making the change. I once worked with a good friend of mine who works for, used to work for one of the large banks, said that he estimated a good 75% of all risk assessment produced in change records was wrong. And that was because the person putting in the change oftentimes did not know how risky it really was or wasn't, because they didn't fully understand the full purview of the application and fully understand what disaster recovery systems may be in place, what high availability systems were in place, or how the organization ranked the criticality of the system. And he said what made it worse is that his organization was not tied into the normal change management life cycle. So what we want is we want impact analysis that relies upon good, solid, trustworthy information, allows different teams and stakeholders to pull the pieces together. And we also want the solution to automatically identify and present to us who are the right people, who are the right stakeholders, who are the right business owners that need to be made informed of this change that I'm proposing, and bring that forward to us as part of that automatic presentation of knowledge to ensure we know what's really going on and that we're making good business decisions. Lastly, we need to spend just a second on process optimization and talk about this a little bit more. As we said before, we all know that many of our processes we would say are inefficient and bloated. But every one of us can talk about at least one point in our recent past where our process either kept us from having a problem that could have been catastrophic, or sadly, we could also probably think of processes that have resulted in a catastrophic result or an unintended result. A solution like what we've been discussing here for the last few minutes would enable an organization to optimize their process, because first, we come back to that data trustworthiness. If you have the data you trust and you have it presented in a way that the human being on the other side can synthesize it and turn it into actionable knowledge, then you have, and be able to present it in a way that they can consume it, then you do not have to have the steps in the process that are required to backstop the fear that you have in we don't have the data, or we don't know the data, or we need to go discover it here in the process. Let me give you an example of one. I used to work for a company that every quarter, myself and 12 other individuals had to present metrics, performance metrics to our executive management. And it was all around various different projects, etc. Now, we all had access to the exact same data warehouse where this data would reside. We all had the same process to how we logged in, how we pulled the data. However, we were pulling basically a giant spreadsheet of data that we would then synthesize into the metrics we wanted. When we went into the QBRs, we would spend the first 45 minutes to an hour, each and every one of us, defending how we created the metrics that we were presenting and why our information was valid and correct. Realizing that we were wasting an awful lot of time rehashing this stuff, we decided to improve the process. And in those process improvements, we said, okay, everybody will follow this standard process for developing this metric. The next problem we fell into was that not everybody developed the metrics or would apply them. We had inconsistency still, even though we said we had modified the process to accommodate it. Finally, what we ultimately did is we said, okay, we're going to get together and we're going to put together work teams, and we're going to come up with consensus of how these metrics should be generated, and now we're going to have the system just automatically generate them. You will utilize this system. You will pull the reports that you want that have been generated, and because you're pulling those, they are business blessed. At that point, we were able to optimize our process, save over 5 hours in developing the material for the QBR for each person, and then we got rid of that 1 hour we would spend at each QBR trying to figure out whether or not our information was valid. The same thing happens here. As we get the data to where it is more trustworthy. We make it easy and accessible to people. We present what is needed for them, and we put that all together. Then we can also virtualize the process for approval. We can virtualize the process for weigh-in to where our stakeholders can come in, look at all of these things, see what the change owner sees, and respond and say either yes, we agree, no, we don't. And now we move these big, expensive, painful meetings to where they're more exception-based or high visibility, very high severity around, and some of the smaller stuff can just fall off because now we have greater confidence in our decision-making. So in summary, analysts and businesses both agree current solutions have not fully delivered on the promises. And while they have delivered considerable value in the past, they're ever increasingly becoming insufficient for today's needs. Organizations are looking for solutions that more closely align with their evolving needs while being constrained by resources and economic realities. And a new generation of solutions is required that can empower our IT professionals while accepting the reality of the information in the organization, but still manage to equip users with trustworthy knowledge. It gets back to what George brought forward and the CTO from NASA said, which was what? That we have to move to a more expert-based approach, and the only way we're going to do that is equip the right people at the right place in the right context with the right information to do that. If you'd like to know more about ITinvolve, we certainly encourage you to go out to ITinvolve.com and get that information. And at this time, I believe we're ready to take some questions.
Okay, great. This one, George, what you've discussed concerning the evolution of the help desk, in your estimation, what is the time horizon before general adoption?
Before general adoption of the help desk or of my future idea?
Concerning the evolution of the help desk.
Well, I guess what I'm seeing out there is this. I'm surprised at some of the questions that still come up. They're really quite basic. We're actually saying things to people that we said 10 or 12 years ago, and that they're writing down saying, oh, yes, that's the way it should be done. Oh, yeah, that's the way it should be done. But we haven't really changed our tune out there. There's several of us that I would consider experts in the world of help desk, and we're surprised to see the same things reoccur. And maybe that's generational. Maybe the new people are learning from square one. They're not learning the history of the past, and they're starting from scratch. But in general, I believe that this evolution that we're in the middle of right now of social media and getting answers from experts that we don't know the names of, but that maybe we need to identify through things like Yammer. We need to start identifying those experts and maybe even rewarding them. I believe that's underway right now. It's been underway for a couple of years, and it's moving. It's just starting to spread. It'll be very viral. It's going to be totally viral from the user community standpoint, and maybe a surprise from the service desk standpoint. But I think it's happening right now.
So you don't see it as something George, as something that's being instigated by service desk. It's something that's going to, one day the service desk is going to wake up and be in it.
Precisely. I think that's where we're at right now. Some service desks realize it, and some service desks don't.
Okay. This next one's for either one of you, Michael or George. Do you really see socialization within ITSM as something that is here to stay, or is it just a fad that in a few years we will be saying, remember when we thought?
That's a really good question because, I'm trying to think of the number of different fads that I've lived through my IT career, and I'm sure, George, you've got a few of them too. But I think it's here to stay. I don't think it's here. I think it's going. I think George is right, and I'm sorry, George. I certainly hope you expand on this as well. But I think what George answered previously is the way it's going to happen. It's not going to be as blatant as we establish a help desk. It's going to be more like silent evolution versus violent revolution. But it is here to stay. I just think it's going to be, we're going to have a changing of the IT guard, if you will, in order for it to take that next level of acceleration.
Well, and the problem is, I think that IT has grown up over the last, several decades with the basic philosophy of control, in other words, and well-founded, because if we could control the infrastructure, then it would stay up longer, our availability would be greater, and we'd be meeting the needs of the business for productivity, et cetera. So there's a lot of history that comes into play that says control in IT is a good thing. So this is out of control. There's no question. This is not just beyond our control. It's out of control. And it's happening, and we're not going to be able to stop it, and we really can't block it. If we say, well, we're blocking Facebook on the corporate network, fine. So everybody brings in their phone and they do Facebook. It's just silly. I mean, it's just we have to think differently. We have to be different people in the world of IT in order to integrate social media in, and in order to take advantage of it, because it represents not just a threat, but a huge opportunity for us to do IT differently.
I would agree.
Okay, I think we've got time for one last question. This one's for you, Michael. Your presentation is very interesting, but do you really think that IT professionals are willing to adopt the social sourcing or documentation approach that you spoke about?
Yes, I do. I've heard the arguments that say, well, Group A isn't interested in sharing knowledge with Group B, and you know what? I lived in those worlds, and I know that there is truth to that to some degree. But I also know that over the last 5 to 7 years, I've seen a significant breakdown in that. Current economic viabilities, other issues have made where that's pretty well had to go by the wayside. Also, I think you see a change of where you used to see very strict silos in areas. You're finding where organizations are having to blend those and make them more shades of gray. So I think this community sourcing, or this ability to leverage these experts and all, I think the example George gave in his Yammer example of where, okay, the gentleman at the help desk realized what was happening, realized that there were these other experts out there, and what did he do? Rather than try to stop them, he lifted their knowledge out and placed them within to where it could be used later on. He did, in essence, use community sourcing of the knowledge, and I think there's more of that that's willing to be done. I just think that current solutions don't always facilitate it, and what ends up happening is people get frustrated because the pain of doing it and the inefficiency of doing it is not offset by the value that they personally benefit from it. And that would be my observation. And George, I know it was directed to me, but I'd be curious to know your thoughts.
No, I basically agree, and I do think we're out of time.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Michael, and thanks, George. This does conclude our session for today. And again, thank you to everyone for joining us.
Thank you.